A humble single mother spilled wine on a socialite's dress and was publicly humiliated. Months later, she married one of the most powerful men in Spain. A marriage of convenience hiding deep secrets, and when the truth came to light, their lives changed forever in ways no one could have predicted. A story of triumph, redemption, and true love, born from the ashes of humiliation. Get ready, because this story will touch your heart. Subscribe to the channel, leave your like on this video, and comment where you're watching from. The ballroom gleamed under luxurious crystal chandeliers hanging from the vaulted ceiling. Hundreds of glasses clinked while Los Angeles elite exchanged rehearsed smiles and superficial conversations. Sarah Collins, in her borrowed black dress and carefully polished second-hand shoes, moved like a shadow among the guests, trying to go unnoticed while fulfilling the duties her sick boss had entrusted to her. Sometimes, it's the most humiliating moments that reveal our true strength, she would think later, remembering how her life changed forever on that spring night. The tray of red wine glasses she was carrying seemed increasingly heavy as she dodged guests. Her fingers were beginning to go numb from the effort when she felt a slight push from behind. Everything happened in slow motion, the tray tilting, the garnet liquid flying through the air like a crimson cascade, and finally, the shrill cry of Victoria Harrison, the hostess of the charity gala, when the wine irreversibly stained her designer ivory dress. "Look what you've done, you idiot," Victoria shouted as the entire ballroom fell silent. "Do you have any idea how much this dress costs? More than you'll earn in a whole year." The laughter began as a murmur and soon turned into an avalanche of mockery. Sarah, paralyzed, felt heat rising to her cheeks as looks of contempt pierced her like daggers. "Who is this woman? She doesn't belong here," someone muttered loud enough for everyone to hear. "Probably one of those opportunists who sneak into these events," another replied. Sarah looked up, finding herself facing a wall of smiling faces enjoying her misfortune. At that moment, among the crowd, she noticed a tall man who wasn't laughing. His dark eyes observed her with an indecipherable expression. Before she could understand what was happening, 2 security guards were escorting her toward the exit. With each step, her dignity crumbled a little more, but she refused to shed a single tear until she was out of sight of those cruel gazes. As she descended the marble stairs of the mansion, with the night breeze drying the cold sweat on her forehead, Sarah made a silent promise. Never again. Never again will I allow myself to feel insignificant. What she didn't know was that someone else had also made a promise that night, watching her from the shadows. The small kitchen in Sarah's apartment smelled of freshly made coffee and toast. Tyler, her 8-year-old son, devoured his breakfast while reviewing his math homework. His dark curls fell over his forehead as his pencil scribbled numbers in the notebook. "Mum, why did you come home so late last night?" the boy asked, without looking up from his exercises. Sarah stroked her son's hair while pouring him more orange juice. "Work, honey. You know how Mrs. Wilson is when there are important events." She hadn't told Tyler about the incident. How could she explain to a child that his mother had been publicly humiliated? That they had looked at her as if she was less than nothing? The ringing of the phone interrupted her thoughts. It was Rachel, the human resources secretary at the publishing house, where she worked as an executive assistant to Laura Wilson, the editorial director. "Sarah, I'm so sorry." Rachel's voice sounded genuinely sorry. "There have been cuts throughout the company. The economic situation, you know. Laura has decided to let you go." The world stopped. Sarah clung to the edge of the counter as Rachel's words echoed in her head. Fired? After 3 years of absolute dedication? Is it because of last night? Did Laura tell you anything about the gala? Sarah asked, trying to maintain her composure. No. They're corporate decisions. It has nothing to do with you personally. But Sarah knew it wasn't true. It was no coincidence that she was fired right after the incident. Laura Wilson moved in the same social circles as Victoria Harrison. One call, one derogatory comment, and her livelihood had vanished. After hanging up, she allowed herself exactly 5 minutes to cry silently in the bathroom, with the faucet running so Tyler wouldn't hear her. Then she washed her face, applied makeup to hide her reddened eyes, and returned to the kitchen with a rehearsed smile. "Everything okay, Mom?" asked Tyler, too perceptive for his age. "Perfect, my love." Sarah ruffled his hair. "I have some news. I'm going to change jobs, something better with more flexibility." She had no idea where this better job would come from, but she wouldn't let her son see her desperation. She had savings for 2 months, maybe 3 if she cut all non-essential expenses. After that, while Tyler finished his breakfast, Sarah frantically reviewed job offers on her phone. Her business administration degree and experience should open doors for her, but the job market was ruthless. A message from her friend Jessica appeared on the screen. "My boss needs a temporary event organizer for a series of business conferences. It doesn't pay the same as your current job, but it could be something while you find something better. Interested?" Sarah looked at Tyler, who was now gathering his books for school. His innocent smile, oblivious to adult concerns, was all she needed to make a decision. "Anything," she replied to Jessica. "I'm available to start immediately." What Sarah couldn't imagine was that this temporary job would be the first step on a path that would change her life forever. The Miller Building rose imposingly in LA's financial district, its 50 floors of steel and glass reflecting the sky like a colossal mirror. Sarah adjusted her black pencil skirt, the same one she had worn to dozens of interviews, and took a deep breath before crossing the revolving doors. The lobby seemed designed to intimidate, with its high ceilings, Italian marble, and security guards who scanned each visitor as if looking to detect imposters. Sarah felt exactly like one as she approached the reception desk. "Good morning. I'm Sarah Collins. I'm here for the temporary event organizer position." She tried to make her voice sound confident, professional, as if entering buildings like this was part of her daily routine. The receptionist, an impeccably dressed blonde woman, looked at her over her designer glasses. "8th floor, Ms. Rodriguez is waiting for you." Jessica greeted her with a warm hug as soon as she exited the elevator. Her friend from college had been working as an executive assistant for Miller Enterprises for 2 years. "Thanks for this," whispered Sarah as she followed Jessica through endless corridors. "Don't thank me yet," Jessica replied with a grimace. "The events department has been in crisis since the previous coordinator resigned without notice. They have 3 important conferences this month, and nobody knows where the contracts or budgets are." Sarah felt a pang of anxiety. "I can handle it," she said, more to convince herself than Jessica. The events office was a chaos of open folders, decoration samples, and stressed employees talking on phones. A middle-aged woman in an elegant grey suit approached them. "Sarah Collins. I'm Patricia Rodriguez, Public Relations Director. Jessica has told me wonders about your organizational capacity." Sarah shot a quick glance at her friend, who discreetly winked at her. "We need a miracle," continued Patricia, leading her to a side office. "In 2 weeks we have the annual investors conference and the file is, well, let's say it's a disaster." She showed her a room where boxes of documents were precariously stacked next to menu samples, room layouts and incomplete guest lists. "This is your challenge," said Patricia, handing her a temporary access card. "If you manage to organize it, we'll consider extending your contract." Sarah contemplated the chaos with a mixture of terror and determination. She couldn't afford to fail, not with the rent pending and Tyler's soccer classes to pay for. Over the next few days, Sarah worked like never before. She arrived before anyone else and left when security guards began their night rounds. She catalogued contracts, reorganized budgets, called suppliers, and created systems so nothing would ever get lost again. One night, while reviewing confirmations for the investors' conference, the office door unexpectedly opened. Sarah looked up, expecting to find the cleaning staff, but instead saw a tall man with broad shoulders and an authoritative presence. His perfectly cut dark suit screamed power in every seam. "Excuse me," said Sarah, standing up reflexively. "I didn't know anyone else was still here." The man studied her with curiosity. His eyes, an intense brown, seemed to evaluate every detail of her appearance. "You must be the new organizer," he finally said, with a deep voice that resonated in the small office. Patricia mentioned she had hired temporary help. Sarah automatically extended her hand. "Sarah Collins." "Michael Miller," he responded, shaking her hand firmly. The surname made Sarah hold her breath. Miller. As in Miller Enterprises. As in the Miller Building. She was facing the CEO and owner of the business empire. "Mr. Miller, Sarah stammered, suddenly aware of her slightly wrinkled blouse after hours of work. "I didn't mean to interrupt," he said, pointing to the documents spread across the desk. "I was just passing by to review some papers before leaving." Sarah nodded, not knowing what else to say. He headed toward a filing cabinet in the corner, extracted a folder and turned toward the door. Before leaving, he paused. "I've heard you've done wonders with the events department in just a few days," he commented with a slight smile. "Impressive." "I'm just doing my job, sir." Michael observed her a moment longer, as if trying to solve a puzzle. "Sometimes simply doing the job is more than many can offer," he finally said. "Good night, Ms. Collins." When the door closed behind him, Sarah collapsed in her chair. There was something familiar about that man, but she couldn't place it. What she didn't know was that Michael Miller had recognized her instantly as the woman who had spilled wine on Victoria Harrison at that charity gala. What she also didn't know was that he had been looking for a way to find her again since that night. The investors' conference proceeded with almost military precision. Every detail Sarah had meticulously planned worked perfectly, from the exact timing of each presentation to the strategic arrangement of seats to facilitate conversations between potential partners. From a discreet corner of the main hall, Sarah observed with satisfaction as executives and investors exchanged cards and shook hands, surrounded by the elegant decorations she had selected. Minimalist centerpieces with white orchids and accents of soft lights that created an atmosphere of exclusivity and trust. "Looks like we can breathe easy," commented Patricia, appearing at her side with 2 glasses of water with lemon. She offered one to Sarah. "I haven't seen investors so relaxed and receptive in years." Sarah accepted the glass with a modest smile. "I just applied a bit of environmental psychology. Spaces communicate as much as words." "Well, it has communicated excellence," replied Patricia, observing the room. "Michael is impressed, and believe me, that's not easy to achieve." As if invoked by the mention of his name, Michael Miller appeared before them. He wore a charcoal grey suit that accentuated his athletic figure and carried that aura of natural authority that Sarah had noticed since their first encounter. "Ms. Collins," he greeted with a nod, "I wanted to personally congratulate you. This conference has exceeded all expectations." "Thank you, Mr. Miller," replied Sarah, trying to maintain a professional tone despite the inexplicable nervousness she felt in his presence. "Patricia, could you excuse us for a moment? I need to speak with Ms. Collins about a matter." Patricia nodded and discreetly walked away, leaving them alone amid the controlled bustle of the event. "I understand your temporary contract concludes tomorrow," Michael said without preamble. Sarah felt a knot in her stomach. During the 2 weeks she had worked at Miller Enterprises, she had momentarily managed to forget her precarious financial situation. "So that's correct, sir." Michael studied her with that penetrating gaze that seemed to see beyond her careful professional facade. "I'd like to offer you a permanent position." Sarah blinked, unsure if she had heard correctly. "Excuse me?" "As my personal executive assistant," he clarified. "My previous assistant is retiring next month, and I need someone with your level of organization and efficiency." "But you barely know me," objected Sarah. "I've only worked here for 2 weeks. An enigmatic smile formed on Michael's lips. "Sometimes 2 weeks are enough to recognize exceptional talent, Miss Collins." There was something in his tone, a familiarity that didn't correspond with their brief professional interaction, that disconcerted Sarah. "The salary would be, of course, considerably higher than what you received in your previous position at Wilson Publishing," continued Michael. Sarah tensed. She had never mentioned where she worked before. "How do you know where—" "I did my research," he interrupted naturally. "I don't hire anyone without knowing their professional background." Sarah hesitated. The offer was tempting, more than tempting. It was the solution to all her immediate financial problems. But there was something about the whole situation that troubled her. "May I think about it?" she finally asked. "Of course," granted Michael. "Although I would appreciate an answer by tomorrow, business doesn't wait, Miss Collins." That night, while Tyler slept peacefully in his room, Sarah mentally reviewed the pros and cons of the offer. The salary Michael had mentioned almost tripled what she earned with Laura Wilson. She could comfortably pay the rent, Tyler's soccer classes, and even start a savings fund for his college education. However, something in the way Michael looked at her, as if they shared a secret, disconcerted her. Her phone vibrated with a message from Jessica. "Tell me you've accepted. Working directly for Michael Miller is anyone's dream in the company." Sarah sighed. Maybe she was being paranoid. Maybe life, for once, was giving her a real opportunity. The next morning, with Tyler already at school, Sarah presented herself at Michael Miller's office. His secretary, a severe-looking older woman, showed her in immediately. Michael was standing by the panoramic window that offered a spectacular view of Los Angeles. He turned when Sarah entered. "Ms. Collins," he greeted, "have you made a decision?" Sarah inhaled deeply. "I accept the position, Mr. Miller, but I have one condition." An eyebrow arched with interest on Michael's face. "A condition? I need a schedule that allows me to be with my son in the afternoons. It's the only non-negotiable for me." She expected resistance, but to her surprise, Michael smiled. "Family first, business second," he said softly. "It's a principle I completely agree with, Ms. Collins." He extended his hand. "Welcome to my team." As she shook his hand, Sarah couldn't imagine that she had just taken the first step on a path that would transform every aspect of her existence. 3 months had passed since Sarah began working as Michael Miller's executive assistant. 3 months of getting up early to prepare Tyler's breakfast before dropping him off at school, rushing to the office to have Michael's coffee ready exactly as he liked it, black, no sugar, with a pinch of cinnamon, and organizing his schedule with the precision of a Swiss watchmaker. Sarah's office was now right outside Michael's, an elegant space with views of Sunset Boulevard that reflected her new position in the corporate hierarchy. She had learned to dress differently too. Impeccably cut suits, silk blouses, Italian shoes that, although expensive, were a necessary investment in her new professional life. "Good morning, Sarah," Michael greeted as he passed her desk. As always, his presence filled the room, demanding attention without asking for it. "Do we have the video conference with Shanghai at 10? "Readjusted for 9:30, she replied without consulting her digital calendar. "Mr. Zhang had an unavoidable commitment. I also confirmed the reservation for your dinner with the executives from San Diego tonight and reviewed the contracts for the acquisition of Martinez Technologies." Michael smiled with approval. Efficient, as always. There was a pattern in their interactions, professional, cordial, but with a subtext that Sarah couldn't fully decipher. Sometimes when she thought he didn't notice, she felt Michael's gaze following her, studying her as if looking for something beyond her professional efficiency. The morning proceeded normally until Sarah received an email that made her blood freeze. It was an invitation to a charity gala organized by the Harrison Foundation, the same foundation directed by Victoria Harrison, the woman whose dress she had ruined months ago. "Have you seen the invitation from the Harrison Foundation?" asked Michael, suddenly appearing in the doorway of her office. Sarah nodded, trying to maintain a neutral expression. "It just arrived. Would you like me to confirm your attendance?" "Confirm for 2 people, he said, looking at her intensely. "You'll go with me." It wasn't a request, but an order. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. "Mr. Miller? I don't think it's appropriate." "I'm your assistant, not your companion," he completed. "Precisely. I need someone who knows my business and can maintain relevant conversations with potential investors. It's purely professional." Sarah wanted to object, to explain her history with Victoria Harrison, but how could she do so without revealing her humiliation? Besides, what if Michael already knew? What if that was precisely the reason he wanted her to attend? "As you wish," she finally responded with a tense smile. "Excellent," said Michael, and before returning to his office he added, "And Sarah, make sure to dress appropriately. It's a black tie event." That night, while helping Tyler with his science homework, Sarah couldn't stop thinking about the gala. She would need a new dress, something that wouldn't betray her humble origins, but also wouldn't appear ostentatious. An impossible balance when moving in circles where the value of a handbag could equal several months of her former salary. "Mom, you're not listening to me," complained Tyler, waving his hand in front of Sarah's face. "I'm sorry, honey," she said, returning to reality. "I was thinking about work." "You're always thinking about work lately," observed the child with the brutal frankness of childhood. "But at least now you smile more." Sarah hugged her son, surprised by his perceptiveness. It was true. Despite the stress and complications, her new job had given her back something she had lost: professional pride, a sense of achievement, the certainty of being valued for her talent. "Do you like your boss?" Tyler asked unexpectedly. "What? Why do you ask that?" The boy shrugged. "You talk about him all the time. Mr. Miller this, Mr. Miller that. Sarah felt her cheeks warming. He's my boss, Tyler. It's normal that I talk about him. If you say so, replied the boy, returning to his science exercises with a mischievous smile. Days later, Sarah was leaving an exclusive boutique with a bag containing a dress that had cost more than she wanted to admit. Black, elegant, discreet, but undeniably sophisticated. She had allowed herself this luxury as armor to face LA's high society. While waiting for a taxi, her phone rang. It was Jessica. "Is it true?" her friend asked without greeting. "Are you going to accompany Michael Miller to the Harrison Foundation Gala?" Sarah sighed. "How did you find out?" "The whole building is talking about it," replied Jessica. "Sarah, do you know what this means? Nobody has accompanied Michael to social events since he broke up with Amanda Caldwell 2 years ago." "It's strictly professional," insisted Sarah. "He needs someone who knows his business." "Yeah, right," responded Jessica with skepticism. "And I suppose it's also strictly professional how he looks at you when he thinks nobody notices." Sarah felt a knot in her stomach. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Please, Sarah. Half the department has noticed how his expression changes when you enter a room. The great Michael Miller, LA's most eligible bachelor, is interested in you." "That's ridiculous," replied Sarah with more vehemence than necessary. "He belongs to a completely different world than mine." "Worlds cross more often than you think," said Jessica enigmatically. "Be careful, but don't close doors before knowing what's behind them." The night of the gala, Sarah looked at herself in the mirror one last time before the doorbell rang. The black dress fit her figure perfectly, enhancing her natural elegance. She had pulled her hair back in a low bun, and small silver earrings, a gift from her mother before she passed away, completed her outfit. Mrs. Roberts, her neighbor who would be watching Tyler that night, whistled with admiration when she saw her. "You look like a movie star," commented the elderly woman. "Are you sure you're just going to a work dinner?" Before Sarah could respond, the doorbell rang. She expected a company car, but when she opened the door, she found Michael Miller himself, impeccable in his tuxedo, holding a small bouquet of white orchids. "Ms. Collins," he greeted with a nod. "You are stunning." The sincerity in his voice made Sarah blush. For a brief instant, she forgot her fears about the gala, the social differences, and all the complications that this strange professional relationship entailed. "Thank you, Mr. Miller," she replied, accepting the flowers. "You didn't have to come personally." "On the contrary," he said, offering her his arm. "It was absolutely necessary." As they descended toward the black Bentley waiting in the street, Sarah had the feeling she was entering a world of appearances where nothing was exactly what it seemed, including perhaps the man at her side. The Bel Air Hotel ballroom shimmered under the moonlight, transformed for the occasion into an enchanted garden. Crystal chandeliers hung from metal structures, projecting a soft golden glow over the guests who strolled among extravagant floral arrangements and ice sculptures. Michael's Bentley stopped in front of the entrance, illuminated by torches. Sarah felt her heart race as a valet opened the door. This time she wouldn't enter through the service door, but through the main entrance, on the arm of one of the most powerful men in California. "Breathe," whispered Michael, sensing her tension. "Remember that you have as much right to be here as any of them." Sarah nodded, wondering if he knew the real reason for her anxiety. When Michael offered his arm, she took it, feeling the reassuring firmness of his presence. Upon entering, conversations continued, but Sarah noticed how gazes turned toward them, followed by barely disguised murmurs. Michael, imperturbable, guided her through the ballroom with the confidence of someone accustomed to being the center of attention. "Michael, darling," a honeyed voice interrupted their advance. "What a surprise to see you here. I thought you'd be in New York this week." Victoria Harrison, dazzling in a red dress that seemed painted on her sculptural body, blocked their path. Her eyes briefly rested on Sarah, with a flash of confusion that quickly gave way to a calculated smile. "I changed my plans," responded Michael, with professional courtesy. "Victoria, allow me to introduce Sarah Collins, my executive assistant." "Delighted," said Victoria, extending a perfectly manicured hand. Her eyes scrutinized Sarah intensely. "You look familiar. Have we met before?" Sarah maintained her serene expression as she shook Victoria's hand. "I don't think so, Mrs. Harrison. I have one of those common faces." A glimmer of recognition appeared in Victoria's eyes. But before she could say anything more, Michael intervened. Sarah has revolutionized the management of Miller Enterprises in just 3 months. An exceptional talent. How charming, replied Victoria, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. You've always had a good eye for discovering diamonds in the rough. The insinuation was clear, but Sarah maintained her dignity. The Foundation has organized a magnificent event, Mrs. Harrison. Congratulations. Victoria seemed surprised by the genuine compliment. Thank you. If you'll excuse me, I must attend to other guests. When she walked away, Sarah exhaled slowly. That was intense. You handled it perfectly, commented Michael, guiding her toward the bar. Champagne? Please. While Michael ordered the drinks, Sarah observed the ballroom. She recognized several guests who had witnessed her humiliation months ago. Some looked at her with curiosity, others pretended not to recognize her. They know who I am, she murmured when Michael returned with 2 glasses of champagne. Or at least they suspect. Michael studied her with that penetrating gaze that seemed to read her thoughts. And does that bother you? I'm concerned about how it might affect your reputation, she responded with honesty. To be seen with the woman who spilled wine on Victoria Harrison and was escorted out like a criminal. An enigmatic smile formed on Michael's lips. So you knew? Knew what? That I was there that night. Sarah felt the ground move beneath her feet. You were? In a discreet corner, observing how a woman with more dignity than all those present together endured an unworthy treatment with her head held high. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. Why didn't you say anything? Because I wanted to meet you under different circumstances, he replied, his voice dropping to a more intimate tone. Without the shadow of that incident between us. The orchestra began to play a soft waltz. Michael set his glass on a nearby table and extended his hand towards Sarah. Would you grant me this dance? Sarah hesitated. I don't think it's appropriate. Just one dance, Sarah, he insisted, using her first name for the first time. Not as boss and employee, but as a man and a woman on a beautiful night. Something in his gaze, a vulnerability she had never seen before, made Sarah accept. She set her glass next to his and allowed him to lead her to the dance floor. Michael's hands, firm and sure, held her with unexpected delicacy. They moved in perfect synchrony, as if they had danced together hundreds of times before. You've never told me about yourself, Sarah said softly. About your life, your family. Not much to tell, he replied. Family business, deceased parents, a sister who teaches at a private school. The classic story of the heir who must prove his worth. Sarah looked at him with surprise. Your sister is a teacher. Literature professor at St. Joseph's Academy. She loves her job, although our father never understood why she didn't want to join the family business. St. Joseph's Academy, Tyler's new school, where she had been able to transfer him thanks to her improved salary. My son studies there, said Sarah, for the past 2 months. Something glinted in Michael's eyes, something that seemed suspiciously like satisfaction. Small world, as my grandmother would say. The music changed to a slower rhythm. Michael pulled her a little closer, and Sarah couldn't find the will to resist. There was something hypnotic about the moment. The dim lights, the enveloping music, the subtle scent of his aftershave. Why did you really hire me? She asked in a whisper. Michael looked her directly in the eyes. Because I saw something in you that night that is incredibly rare in my world. Authenticity. And then, when you organized the investors' conference, you confirmed every impression I had about your talent. Just that? My professional talent? A slow smile spread across Michael's face. For now, let's leave it at that. The music ended, but they remained a moment longer on the dance floor, connected by something that went beyond words. We should socialize, Sarah finally said, breaking the spell of the moment. There are important investors here. Always so professional, commented Michael, but he released her reluctantly. You're right, of course. The rest of the night passed in a blur of introductions, business conversations, and glasses of champagne that Sarah barely tasted. At his side, Michael was the epitome of the charismatic businessman, but every so often his eyes sought hers across the ballroom, silently communicating something that Sarah dared not name. Near midnight, when the gala began to lose energy, Michael approached her again. Ready to leave? Sarah nodded, exhausted by the constant tension of maintaining appearances. On the way back, a comfortable silence filled the interior of the Bentley. Los Angeles passed like an impressionist painting through the tinted windows, diffuse lights, mixed colors, an abstract beauty that reflected Sarah's emotional confusion. "Thank you for accompanying me tonight," said Michael when the car stopped in front of Sarah's building. "You were perfect. I just did my job," she replied, although they both knew it wasn't true. Michael gently took her hand. "Sarah, there's something I need to tell you. About the company. About the future." She waited, suddenly alert. "Miller Enterprises is facing financial difficulties," he continued, his voice grave. "Nothing publicly known yet, but we're in a vulnerable position. We need a strategic alliance with another powerful family, preferably conservative in their investments." "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because I trust you," he replied simply, "and because I'll need your help in the coming months to navigate this situation." Sarah nodded slowly. "You can count on me, Mr. Miller." "Michael," he corrected, "after tonight, I think we've moved beyond formalities, don't you think?" A shy smile formed on Sarah's lips. "Michael!" He raised her hand and, in a gesture that surprised her with its delicacy, softly kissed her knuckles. "Good night, Sarah." As she climbed the stairs to her apartment, Sarah felt as if she were floating. The night had been surreal, like a modern fairy tale where Cinderella not only goes to the ball, but returns with the promise of something more. Mrs. Roberts was waiting for her, half asleep on the couch. "Your son is an angel," she murmured, as she gathered her things. "He fell asleep after asking me 3 times what time you'd be back." Sarah thanked her and walked her to the door. Before saying goodbye, the elderly woman looked at her with perceptive eyes. "That man who came to pick you up, there's something special in how he looked at you." "He's my boss," Sarah responded automatically. Mrs. Roberts smiled with the wisdom of her 80 years. "Honey, I've lived long enough to recognize when a man looks at a woman as if she were the answer to a question he's been asking all his life." When the door closed, Sarah leaned against it, finally allowing herself to process everything that had happened. Something was changing, transforming in a direction she would never have imagined. And for the first time in a long time, she wasn't afraid of change. 6 months had passed since that gala. 6 months of subtle but profound changes in Sarah's life. Her relationship with Michael had evolved into a professional partnership based on mutual trust and a respect that, though never openly expressed, seemed to grow each day. Sarah's office was no longer outside Michael's, but now occupied an adjoining office with large windows and a connecting door that metaphorically represented her new position. Not just his assistant, but his confidant in business matters. "The financial reports from the last quarter," said Sarah, placing a folder on Michael's desk. "I've highlighted the problematic areas in red." Michael nodded, studying the documents with a furrowed brow. "We're still losing ground to Hudson Group. It's the 3rd technology acquisition they've snatched from us this year," confirmed Sarah. "Their aggressive innovation policy is paying off." With a sigh, Michael reclined in his leather chair. Fatigue was reflected in the small wrinkles around his eyes, in the tension of his shoulders beneath his impeccable Italian suit. "Sarah, I need your honest opinion, not as my assistant, but as someone I trust." She sat across from him, aware of the weight of those words. "Of course. Do you think we should accept the merger proposal from Thompson Investments?" Sarah carefully considered her response. Thompson Investments, led by patriarch Richard Thompson, was one of the most traditional and conservative families in the financial world. A merger would represent immediate financial stability, but at the cost of the independence that had always characterized Miller Enterprises. "It depends on what you value more," she finally replied. "If it's short-term financial stability, the merger makes sense. But if it's the original vision of the company, then we should look for alternatives." Michael observed her with that penetrating gaze that seemed to see beyond her words. "And what would you value, Sarah?" "Integrity," she replied without hesitation. "Money comes and goes, but once you compromise your principles, it's hard to get them back." A smile slowly formed on Michael's face. "Exactly what I thought you'd say." He stood and walked to the window, contemplating the Los Angeles skyline. Sarah noticed the tension in his posture, the way his hands interlaced behind his back, signs she had learned to recognize as indicators of a difficult decision. "There's another option," he finally said, turning toward her. "Richard Thompson is a traditionalist. He values family structure, stability, the image of a company led by a family man." Sarah nodded, not fully understanding where he was going. He has hinted that he would consider a less invasive strategic alliance than a complete merger if I projected a more stable image. What kind of image? Michael returned to his desk and sat on the edge, unusually close to Sarah. That of a married man. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. Married? Richard has a niece, Olivia. Beautiful, educated at the best universities. The perfect match for a businessman like me. He paused, carefully observing Sarah's reaction. He's been suggesting an arranged marriage for months. Sarah felt an unexpected pang of jealousy that she tried to disguise by adopting a professional tone. I see. And are you considering that option? No, Michael replied firmly. Not with Olivia Thompson. He stood again, as if stillness were impossible for him. Sarah observed him move around the office, perceiving his internal agitation, so rare in a typically controlled man. Sarah, what I'm about to propose is unconventional, he finally said, stopping in front of her, and I want you to know that you can reject it, without any consequence to your position in the company. She waited, feeling as if the world were holding its breath around her. I need a wife, continued Michael, someone who projects stability, family, traditional values. Someone intelligent who can navigate the complex social world I belong to. Someone I implicitly trust. Sarah stopped breathing when she understood where the conversation was heading. I'm proposing a marriage of convenience, he finally said. You would gain permanent financial security for yourself and for Tyler. I would gain the alliance with Thompson without losing control of my company. It would be a purely professional arrangement with clear terms and mutual benefits. The silence that followed seemed to buzz with the intensity of the unspoken. Sarah tried to process the proposal, as unexpected as it was disconcerting. Why me? She finally managed to ask. You could choose anyone, women from your social circle with connections with... Because I trust you, interrupted Michael. Because in these 6 months you've demonstrated an integrity that is rare in my world. Because Tyler needs stability, and you deserve security after struggling alone for so long. He knelt before her, a gesture that dramatically contrasted with his usual authority. And because, if I'm going to pretend to be married to someone, I prefer it to be with a woman I deeply respect. Sarah felt her world spinning vertiginously. The proposal was logical from a coldly practical perspective. Tyler could have the best education. She would never have to worry about rent or medical bills again. His future would be secured. But the price? Pretending a marriage, living a lie, becoming part of a world that had always rejected her. I need time to think about it, she finally said. Michael nodded, standing up. Of course. Take all the time you need. That night, while Tyler slept, Sarah contemplated the city from the window of her modest apartment. The lights of Los Angeles twinkled like fallen stars, reminding her how far she had come since that humiliating night at the charity gala. Her phone vibrated with a message from Michael. Whatever your decision, nothing will change between us professionally. I promise. Sarah smiled weakly. Typical of him, always anticipating her concerns. The doorbell rang, startling her. Who could it be at this hour? When she opened the door, she found Jessica, holding a bottle of wine and 2 glasses. I've heard rumors, her friend said, entering without waiting for an invitation. And by your face, I see they're true. Sarah closed the door, surprised. What rumors? That Michael Miller is considering a strategic marriage. Jessica poured 2 glasses of wine and offered one to Sarah. And that you are the main candidate. How is it possible that it's already known? Asked Sarah, accepting the glass with trembling hands. It's not officially known, clarified Jessica, but Patricia commented to me that Michael has been asking questions about marriage contracts to the legal department and simultaneously has updated your position in the company to a level that would give you access to confidential financial information. You don't have to be a genius to connect the dots. Sarah collapsed onto the sofa. He proposed to me today. And what did you tell him? That I needed time to think about it. Jessica took a sip of wine, studying her friend. What is there to think about? It's a unique opportunity. Financial security, social prestige, access to circles that would normally be closed to us. And living a lie, added Sarah, pretending feelings that don't exist. An enigmatic smile formed on Jessica's lips. Are you sure you would have to pretend them? Sarah felt her cheeks warming. It's a professional arrangement. Sarah, said Jessica softly, I've known you since college. I've never seen you look at a man the way you look at Michael when you think no one is watching. That's ridiculous, protested Sarah, but without conviction. And he looks at you the same way, continued Jessica. Perhaps this professional arrangement is just an excuse for something you both desire but are afraid to admit. Sarah contemplated her wine glass, lost in contradictory thoughts. Could Jessica be right? That beneath the facade of a pragmatic proposal, there were deeper feelings on both sides. Even if that were the case, she finally said, our worlds are completely different. I come from a working-class family, he from a business dynasty. Worlds change, replied Jessica. They transform, they adapt, like you have these past months. After Jessica left, Sarah couldn't sleep. Michael's proposal spun in her mind like a whirlwind, mixing with Jessica's insinuations and her own confused feelings. The next morning, after dropping Tyler off at school, Sarah headed directly to Michael's office. He was already there, reviewing documents with that absolute concentration that characterized him. "Good morning," she greeted, closing the door behind her. Michael looked up, and for an instant Sarah saw vulnerability in his eyes before his professional expression returned. "Good morning, Sarah. Have you—" "I accept," she interrupted before courage abandoned her. "I accept your proposal, but with conditions." A cautious smile appeared on Michael's face. "I'm listening. First, Tyler must agree. I won't do anything that disturbs or confuses him." Michael nodded. "Of course. Second, I want a fair prenuptial agreement that protects my interests and those of my son, regardless of how long this arrangement lasts." "I already asked the legal department to prepare something along those terms," confirmed Michael. "You'll have your own lawyer to review it." Sarah took a deep breath before continuing. "Third, I need absolute honesty between us, even when truths are uncomfortable. If this is going to work, there can be no secrets or manipulations." Michael's expression turned serious. "You have my word." "And finally," concluded Sarah, "I want to maintain my professional independence. I'll continue working, though in a different position to avoid conflicts of interest." Michael stood and circled his desk until he was in front of her. "I accept all your conditions." He extended his hand, but instead of shaking it, Sarah gently took it, intertwining her fingers with his in a gesture that transcended the professional. "Then we have an agreement," she said, feeling a strange mixture of fear and anticipation. "An agreement," repeated Michael, his voice softer than usual, as their eyes met in a gaze that communicated much more than words. And so, with that simple exchange, Sarah's fate took another unexpected turn, leading her down a path she would never have imagined when she spilled that glass of wine months ago. "Are we going to live in a castle?" Tyler's question, formulated with wide eyes as Sarah explained the imminent change in their lives, almost made her smile despite her nervousness. They were sitting in the small park near their apartment, sharing an ice cream while the afternoon sun bathed the swings and slides with a golden light. Sarah had carefully chosen this moment and place to talk to her son about her engagement to Michael Miller. "Not exactly a castle," replied Sarah, cleaning a chocolate stain from Tyler's chin. "But it is a very large house with a garden. You'll have your own room, plenty of space to play, and even a swimming pool." "And will Mr. Miller live with us?" asked Tyler, his expression suddenly serious. "Will he be like a dad?" Sarah felt a lump in her throat. At 8 years old, Tyler barely had memories of his biological father, who had abandoned them when the boy was barely 2. "Michael will be my husband," she explained carefully. "And over time, perhaps you'll develop a special relationship, but no one can replace your real dad, even though he's not with us." Tyler thoughtfully licked his ice cream. "I like him. When he came to pick me up from school last month, he let me sit in his super expensive car and talk to me about soccer. And Ms. Miller says her brother was always good with kids." Sarah blinked, surprised. "Ms. Miller? Your literature teacher?" "Yep," confirmed Tyler. "She told us her brother owns a bunch of companies, but that when they were little, he always invented the best games. I think she didn't know I knew you." Sarah processed this information with amazement. Emily Miller, Michael's sister, was Tyler's teacher, a coincidence too perfect to be casual. "And what do you think about all this?" she finally asked, returning to the main issue. "Does it seem okay to you that we move and that I marry Michael?" Tyler shrugged with that childlike simplicity that sometimes contained more wisdom than all adult deliberations. "If you're happy, I'm happy, Mom. Besides, I'll have a pool." Sarah hugged her son, holding back tears. The transparency of his love, without conditions or expectations, was a reminder of why she did all this, to secure his future, to protect him from the uncertainties she had faced. "I love you, little one," she whispered against his hair. "And I love you, Mom," replied Tyler, before adding pragmatically, "Can I have another ice cream?" The wedding preparations proceeded with the efficiency characteristic of Michael in business. A discreet team of planners took care of the details, while Sarah finalized arrangements to leave her apartment and move her belongings to the Miller Mansion in Beverly Hills, one of the most exclusive residential areas of Los Angeles. One afternoon, while reviewing old documents to decide what to keep and what to discard, Sarah found a box of family photographs she hadn't opened in years. Among the faded images of her childhood, one in particular caught her attention. Her mother, much younger, smiling next to a group of people at what appeared to be a company party. Sarah brought the photograph closer to the light. Her mother had worked as a secretary for several companies before falling ill, but had never mentioned anything special about any of them. However, something in the image seemed familiar. Studying more closely, Sarah held her breath as she recognized a young man in the background of the photograph. It was Andrew Miller, Michael's father, recognizable by his resemblance to his son and by the numerous corporate photographs that decorated the offices of Miller Enterprises. "It can't be," murmured Sarah, frantically searching for more photographs from that period. She found another, smaller one, where her mother appeared receiving an award from Andrew Miller himself. On the back, a date and an inscription. Award for Administrative Excellence, Miller Group, 1990. Her mother had worked for the Miller family. It was an unexpected connection that Sarah had never known about, probably because her mother had left the job long before she was born. The discovery left her thoughtful. Could it be possible that Michael knew about this connection? That he had specifically sought her out for some reason related to the past? She decided to keep the photographs in her purse. She would talk to Michael about it, fulfilling her condition of absolute honesty between them. The Miller Mansion was exactly as Tyler had imagined. Imposing, elegant, with expansive gardens and a crystal-clear swimming pool. The day Sarah and her son arrived to move in, they were greeted by a discreet team of household staff and by Michael himself, who seemed unusually nervous. "Welcome to your new home," he said, with a formality that contrasted with the warmth in his gaze. Tyler, quickly overcoming his initial shyness, began to explore the house with the inexhaustible energy of childhood. "Mom, there's a home theater. And the bathrooms have weird buttons on the toilets." Sarah laughed, grateful for the naturalness with which her son faced this radical change in their lives. "I've assigned him the room overlooking the back garden," explained Michael, as he guided Sarah up the elegant main staircase. "I thought he'd like being able to see the pool from his window." "That's very considerate," replied Sarah, surprised by the attention to detail. "Has this," continued Michael, opening double doors at the end of the hallway, "is our suite." Sarah held her breath as she entered the spacious bedroom with its adjoining dressing room and a marble bathroom that looked like it came from a luxury hotel. The decor, in neutral tones with touches of deep blue, was elegant without being ostentatious. "It's beautiful," she commented, noticing that Michael had clearly cleared half of the dressing room for her belongings. "I had some things adapted to make you feel comfortable," he explained, pointing to a corner where a small desk had been installed in front of the window. "I know you like to read in natural light." The gesture, so intimate in its consideration, disconcerted her. It was difficult to reconcile these personal attentions with the supposedly professional nature of their agreement. "Michael," said Sarah, deciding it was the moment for the pending conversation, "I found something while packing that I think you should see." She took the photographs from her purse and showed them to him. Michael examined them with a neutral expression, but Sarah noticed a subtle change in his posture. "Your mother worked for my father," he finally said, returning the photographs. "You knew?" Michael hesitated a moment before responding. "Yes." "Since when?" "Since before I hired you." Sarah felt a wave of confusion and something resembling betrayal. "Why didn't you tell me? Is that why you offered me the job, some kind of debt to my mother?" Michael shook his head. It's not that simple, Sarah. Explain it to me then, she insisted. We agreed to absolute honesty, remember? With a sigh, Michael sat on the edge of the bed, inviting her to do the same. When Sarah remained standing, he respected her distance. Your mother, Mary Collins, was more than an employee to my father. She was the person who discovered and internally reported an accounting fraud that could have destroyed the company. Her integrity saved Miller Enterprises from a financial scandal. Sarah processed this information, vaguely remembering how her mother sometimes talked about the importance of doing the right thing even if no one applauds you for it. When I saw you at that gala, continued Michael, I didn't recognize you immediately. It was afterwards, when I investigated who was the woman who had maintained her dignity in the face of Victoria Harrison's cruelty, that I discovered your surname and the connection. So you hired me because of my mother, out of gratitude to her. I hired you because you demonstrated the same courage and integrity as her, corrected Michael. But yes, I acknowledge that the connection sparked my initial curiosity. Sarah finally sat down, processing this revelation. Why didn't you tell me before? I wanted our relationship to be built on the present, not on the past, he replied. I feared that if you knew about the connection, you would doubt your own merits, think it was all because of an old debt and not because of your personal worth. There was logic in his explanation, but Sarah still felt that something didn't fit completely. There's more, isn't there? Michael looked at her with a mixture of surprise and resignation. You've learned to read me too well. He stood and walked to the window, contemplating the gardens where Tyler now ran, chasing what appeared to be a patient gardener, showing him the different plants. My father not only professionally admired your mother, he finally said, he was in love with her. Sarah felt the air leave her lungs. What? It was an unrequited love, as far as I know. Your mother was married. She was upright in all aspects of her life. But my father never forgot the woman who combined beauty, intelligence, and unwavering principles. Michael turned to her. When I met you, I saw those same qualities in you. The revelation floated between them, loaded with implications that Sarah was just beginning to comprehend. Are you saying you chose me because I remind you of the woman your father couldn't have? No, replied Michael firmly. I chose you because you are extraordinary in your own right. The story of our parents is just that. History. We are writing our own chapter. He approached her cautiously, like someone approaching a frightened animal. The only thing I regret is not telling you before. I feared you would misinterpret my motives, exactly as you're doing now. Sarah wanted to be angry, to feel manipulated, but the sincerity in Michael's eyes disarmed her indignation. Besides, hadn't she herself initially concealed her connection to Victoria Harrison? No more secrets, she finally said. From either of us. Michael nodded, extending his hand toward her. No more secrets. When Sarah took his hand, she felt they were sealing a pact deeper than the marital agreement they had negotiated. It was a commitment to truth, to mutual vulnerability, to the possibility of building something authentic on initially artificial foundations. Mom! Michael! Tyler's enthusiastic voice interrupted the moment as the boy came running into the room. There's a perfect tree for a treehouse in the garden. Thomas says we could build one. Michael turned to the boy with a genuine smile. Has Thomas already shown you the garden? Yes, and he says there are turtles in the pond. Can we go see them? Can you both come, please? The naturalness with which Tyler included them both in his childish enthusiasm made Sarah feel a lump in her throat. Perhaps, after all, this strange improvised family had a chance of working. Of course, replied Michael, offering one hand to Tyler and the other to Sarah. Let's go meet the turtles. And so, united by the intertwined hands of a child, they began to tour the grounds of their new shared home together, discovering not only the property, but also the possibilities of their unusual arrangement. The wedding dress hung like a white ghost in the closet of the main suite. Sarah contemplated it with a mixture of contradictory emotions, while Jessica adjusted the final details of her hairstyle. You look dazzling, commented her friend, securing a rebellious strand with an invisible hairpin. Michael will be breathless when he sees you. Sarah tried to smile, but the gesture didn't reach her eyes. In recent weeks, the wedding preparations had consumed every free moment, transforming from a simple legal procedure into a social event of unexpected proportions. "I don't understand why we need so much spectacle," she murmured, nervously adjusting the delicate pearl necklace that Michael had given her as something new for the ceremony. "It was supposed to be something discreet, practical." Jessica looked at her through the mirror with a knowing expression. "Because a man like Michael Miller doesn't get married discreetly. It's an event, a social statement, a message to the business world." Sarah knew her friend was right. The wedding had become a carefully choreographed piece of social theater. The 300 guests included the business elite of California, influential politicians, and of course, Richard Thompson and his entire family, whose approval was the main objective of the elaborate performance. A soft knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. It was Emily Miller, Michael's sister and Tyler's teacher, who had become an unexpected ally during the preparations. "Ready for the final transformation?" asked Emily, entering with a blue velvet box in her hands. Unlike what Sarah had initially feared, Emily had embraced the idea of her brother's marriage with genuine enthusiasm. "Michael needs someone real in his life," she had confessed weeks earlier. "Someone who sees the man, not the surname or the bank account." "As ready as I can be," replied Sarah with a nervous smile. Emily opened the box, revealing a vintage tiara of diamonds and sapphires that gleamed with an icy fire under the room's light. "It was our grandmother's," explained Emily, as Jessica held her breath at the sight of the jewel. "It's been in the Miller family for 4 generations. Each bride has worn it on her special day." With delicacy, Emily placed the tiara on Sarah's elaborate updo. The weight of the precious metal on her head seemed a metaphor for the family legacy she would now carry. "Perfect," murmured Emily, studying the final effect. "Now you really look like a Miller." The words, although well-intentioned, caused a pang of discomfort in Sarah. Was that what she was doing? Abandoning her identity to adopt another? "I need a moment alone," requested Sarah, suddenly feeling the need to breathe. When Jessica and Emily left, Sarah approached the window that overlooked the garden where the final preparations for the ceremony were being made. White flower arches, cream silk-covered chairs, a string orchestra tuning their instruments. Everything seemed taken from a fairy tale. Her phone vibrated with a message from Michael. "Nervous?" Sarah smiled at the simplicity of the question. "Terrified," she replied honestly. "Me too," came the immediate response, surprising her. "But when I see you walking toward me, everything will make sense." There was a vulnerability in that message that contrasted with Michael's public image. The calculating businessman, the relentless strategist. In recent months, Sarah had glimpsed more and more of the man behind the facade, especially in his interactions with Tyler. Against all odds, her son and Michael had developed a genuine bond. Michael dedicated time each day to be with Tyler, helping him with homework, teaching him to swim in the pool, or simply listening to his endless stories about dinosaurs and superheroes with infinite patience. "It's time," announced Jessica, returning to the room. "Everyone is in place." Sarah took a deep breath, letting her friend help her into the dress, a creation of lace and silk that combined classic elegance with modern touches, designed specifically for her by one of the most exclusive fashion designers in Los Angeles. "Remember," said Jessica while adjusting the train, "when you walk toward the altar, do so as if this whole world belonged to you, not as someone who apologizes for existing." Sarah nodded, grateful for the advice that transcended the ceremony and applied to her entire new life. The orchestra's music floated in the perfumed air of the garden as Sarah waited behind a screen of flowers that concealed her from the guests. At her side, Tyler, impeccable in his pageboy suit, looked at her with bright eyes. "You're beautiful, Mom," said the boy with the raw sincerity of childhood. "Like a real princess." Sarah carefully crouched to be at his height, taking care not to wrinkle the dress. "And you look very handsome, my prince." "Are you scared?" asked Tyler, perceiving her tension. "A little," admitted Sarah. "It's a big change." Tyler nodded with premature wisdom. "Michael is scared too. I saw him breathing like you do when you're nervous." The observation made Sarah smile. It was comforting to know she wasn't the only one feeling the weight of the moment. The first notes of the wedding march indicated it was time. Tyler took his place in front of her, holding a small cushion with the rings. Sarah inhaled deeply and began to walk when the flowers parted, revealing her to the guests. Hundreds of faces turned toward her, some with genuine admiration, others with calculating curiosity, evaluating the woman who had captured LA's most eligible bachelor. Among the crowd, Sarah distinguished Victoria Harrison, whose expression oscillated between disbelief and barely disguised envy. But all those faces vanished when Sarah focused her gaze on the man waiting for her by the altar. Michael, impeccable in his tailcoat, observed her with an intensity that momentarily made the world around them disappear. It wasn't the gaze of a man executing a business transaction. It was the gaze of someone seeing a long-cherished dream materialize. When she reached his side and Michael took her hand, Sarah felt a shiver run through her body. His fingers were surprisingly warm, firm, transmitting a confidence she silently appreciated. "You are beyond words," he whispered, and something in his voice made Sarah believe he wasn't acting for the gallery. The ceremony proceeded like in a dream, the vows carefully drafted to sound authentic without promising the impossible, the exchange of rings with Tyler proudly fulfilling his role, the final kiss, brief but surprisingly charged with emotion, that sealed their union before society. During the reception, as they danced the traditional waltz under the stars and the lights of 1,000 candles, Sarah felt a strange peace replacing her earlier anxiety. "What are you thinking about?" asked Michael, guiding her elegantly across the dance floor. "About how surreal all this is," she replied honestly. 9 months ago I was being humiliated at a similar gala. Now I'm dancing as Mrs. Miller with a family tiara on my head. An enigmatic smile formed on Michael's lips. "Life has a strange sense of humor, don't you think? Did you know everything would lead to this when you saw me that night?" The question escaped Sarah's lips before she could contain it, driven by an intuition that had been growing in her. Michael maintained the rhythm of the dance, but Sarah noticed how his eyes slightly darkened. "Not with certainty," he finally replied. "But yes, with hope." Before Sarah could process this veiled confession, they were interrupted by Richard Thompson, the patriarch of the family, whose approval was the main objective of the elaborate wedding. "Michael, my boy," greeted the older man with calculated affection. "You've found a gem. Congratulations." "Thank you, Richard," replied Michael, maintaining a protective hand on Sarah's waist. "Let me officially introduce you to my wife, Sarah Miller." The surname sounded strange in Sarah's ears, like a borrowed suit that didn't yet fit her body completely. "A pleasure, Mrs. Miller," said Richard, kissing her hand with antiquated gallantry. "You must be an exceptional woman to have conquered this confirmed bachelor." "The pleasure is mine, Mr. Thompson," replied Sarah with the practiced courtesy she had perfected in recent months. "Michael speaks very highly of you and your business vision." Richard smiled, clearly pleased by the compliment. "I hope we can get to know each other better. My wife is organizing a weekend at our estate in Malibu next month. It would be an honor to have you join us." "We'll be there," confirmed Michael. When Richard walked away, Sarah felt she had passed some kind of test. "Was that part of the plan?" she asked quietly. "It was the main objective," confirmed Michael. "Richard would never have seriously considered an alliance with an unstable bachelor, as he called me. Now he sees us as a respectable, traditional family, the kind of partner that fits with his conservative values." Sarah nodded, understanding the strategy, but feeling a pang of disappointment that she didn't dare examine too closely. The evening continued with toasts, more dances, strategic conversations with key guests. Sarah interpreted her role perfectly, balancing elegance and warmth, presenting herself as the ideal companion for a man of Michael's position. Near midnight, as guests began to say goodbye, Sarah found a moment of solitude on a secluded terrace. The full moon bathed the gardens with a silver light that transformed the landscape into something magical and ethereal. "Here you are," said Michael, joining her. He slightly loosened his bow tie and offered her a glass of champagne. "I thought you might need this." Sarah accepted the glass with a tired smile. "Thank you, it's been intense." "You did magnificently," he said, leaning on the balustrade beside her. "Richard is completely impressed. His wife adores you, which is a miracle considering she detests almost all women under 50. "I'm glad to have met expectations," replied Sarah, trying to keep her voice from revealing the emptiness she was beginning to feel now that the show was over. Michael studied her in silence for a moment. "What's wrong?" "Nothing," she said automatically, but seeing his skeptical expression, she added, "It's just that everything has been so elaborate, so perfect. The dream wedding any girl would imagine, except that it's not real," completed Michael softly. Sarah nodded, surprised by the vulnerability she allowed herself to show. "What if I told you," continued Michael, turning to face her completely, "that for me parts of this feel more real than anything else in my life?" The confession hung between them, fragile as a soap bubble. Sarah searched his eyes for some indication of falsehood, of manipulation, but found only a disconcerting sincerity. "I don't know what to say to that," she finally admitted. "Don't say anything," he replied. "Just give us time." "Both of us?" He took her hand, intertwining his fingers with hers, in a gesture that was beginning to become familiar. "Let's go say goodbye to the last guests. Tomorrow our life together begins, whatever that means." As they returned to the party, Sarah found herself wondering what was more disconcerting, that their marriage began as a farce, or that there was a possibility it would end up being genuine. Life as Sarah Miller turned out to be surprisingly pleasant. 3 months after the wedding, she had found a comfortable rhythm in her new existence. Quiet breakfasts with Tyler before Thomas, the chauffeur, took him to school. Mornings dedicated to her new role as director of the Miller Foundation, a position that allowed her to use her organizational talents for charitable causes. Afternoons shared between work and time with her son. And then there were the nights. Nights where she and Michael shared dinners, conversations, and a bedroom, although with the discretion of connected rooms that allowed them to maintain their original agreement of a marriage without physical intimacy. However, something was changing between them, slowly transforming. Small gestures that transcended what had been agreed upon, a hand that lingered when passing coffee in the morning, gazes that were held longer than necessary during dinners, a physical proximity that neither seemed to want to break when they shared the couch reviewing documents at night. One Thursday morning, while Sarah was reviewing proposals for a new scholarship program for the foundation, she received an unexpected call. "Sarah, it's Patricia," said the tense voice of the public relations director of Miller Enterprises. "I need you to come to the office. Something delicate has come up." The seriousness in Patricia's voice immediately put Sarah on alert. "Does it have to do with Michael?" "Indirectly," replied Patricia cautiously. "I'd prefer not to discuss it over the phone." An hour later, Sarah entered Patricia's office, who received her with a grave expression and a tablet in her hands. "Before I show you this," Patricia began, "I want you to know that I tried to verify the source and stop its distribution, but it's already circulating in certain circles." She handed the tablet to Sarah, who saw on the screen what appeared to be an article from a Digital Society magazine. "The farce of the year, the Miller marriage exposed." With a knot in her stomach, Sarah began to read. The article, signed by an unknown journalist, claimed to have evidence that her marriage to Michael was a business arrangement designed to secure the alliance with Thompson Investments. It cited sources close to the couple, who detailed the terms of the agreement, including exact figures from the prenuptial contract. "This is—" Sarah couldn't find the words as panic grew in her chest. "A leak," completed Patricia. "Someone with access to confidential information has been talking to the press." Sarah reread specific paragraphs, recognizing details that could only come from someone very close to them. Exact phrases from private conversations, references to specific clauses of the agreement that only a handful of people knew. "Who would do something like this?" she asked, although a suspicion was beginning to form in her mind. "That's the million-dollar question," replied Patricia. "I've initiated a discreet investigation, but meanwhile we need a strategy to handle this publicly." Sarah nodded, the initial shock giving way to a pragmatic approach. "Does Michael already know?" "He's in Seattle until tomorrow, closing the deal with the German investors. I decided to inform you first so you'd be prepared when he returns." Thanking Patricia for her consideration, Sarah began to think about the ramifications. If Richard Thompson read this, the entire elaborate strategy to secure his trust would collapse. The financial stability they had been carefully building for months could evaporate in a matter of days. "I need to know who leaked this," said Sarah with determination. "And I need to speak with Michael immediately in private." Patricia nodded. "I've prepared a list of people who had knowledge of the details mentioned in the article. It's surprisingly short." She handed her a sheet with barely 6 names. Sarah reviewed it, feeling a pang of pain when she saw one particular name, Jessica Rivera, her friend from college, who had initially recommended her for the job at Miller Enterprises, who had been her confidant throughout the process, even her maid of honor at the wedding. "Jessica," she murmured, suddenly remembering small details, questions that were too specific about her agreement with Michael, her unusual interest in the meetings with Thompson, her recent lifestyle change that included a new apartment and designer clothes she could hardly afford on her salary. "Do you suspect anyone in particular?" asked Patricia, observing her reaction. "I need to confirm it," replied Sarah, avoiding a direct accusation. "Can you arrange a private video call with Michael as soon as possible?" 2 hours later, in the privacy of Michael's study in the mansion, Sarah saw his face on the computer screen. Despite the distance and the digital connection, she could perceive his contained fury. "I'm going to take the first flight back," said Michael after Sarah explained the situation. "No," she replied firmly. "You need to close that deal in Seattle. It's crucial for the company, especially now." "This is more important, Sarah. Our situation. I can handle it until you return," she insisted. "I have a theory about who leaked the information, and Patricia is already working on a communication strategy." Michael studied her through the screen, his expression softening slightly. "You're extraordinary, you know that? Most people would be having a nervous breakdown in your situation." "Oh, I'll have my breakdown later in private," joked Sarah, although with a touch of truth. "Right now we need to act with intelligence, not emotion." They discussed the next steps. Sarah would discreetly confront Jessica, while Patricia prepared a statement that neither confirmed nor denied the allegations, but made it clear that the Millers' private life was not open to speculation. "Sarah," said Michael before ending the call, his voice suddenly vulnerable, "I'm sorry for putting you in this position." "We entered into this together," she replied, "and we'll resolve it together." When the call ended, Sarah allowed herself a moment of weakness, letting the tears she had contained flow freely. She wasn't crying over the imminent scandal or the financial complications, but over the betrayal of someone in whom she had implicitly trusted. After composing herself, she called Jessica, inviting her for coffee at a discreet cafe near the office. Her friend accepted with suspicious enthusiasm, suggesting she had no idea that Sarah knew about the leak. The cafe was a quiet place, with tables far enough apart to maintain private conversations. Sarah arrived first, choosing a secluded corner where they could talk without being overheard. Jessica appeared 10 minutes late, sporting a handbag that Sarah recognized as part of the latest collection from a luxury brand, impossible to acquire on her salary. "Sarah," she greeted with exaggerated effusiveness, "what a joy to see you outside of social events." Sarah maintained a cordial smile as Jessica sat across from her. "Thank you for coming on such short notice." "I always have time for you," replied Jessica, although her eyes avoided direct contact. "How's married life? Everything good with the handsome Michael?" The question, apparently innocent, had a subtext that Sarah clearly perceived. "Interesting that you ask," she replied, maintaining a conversational tone while sliding her phone across the table, showing the article Patricia had shown her. "It seems someone has a lot to say about my marriage." Jessica visibly paled but recovered quickly. "Oh my God, what is this? Who would write something like this?" Her indignation sounded rehearsed, fake. Sarah studied her in silence, noticing the small nervous tics her friend had never been able to control when lying, the accelerated blinking, the way her left hand played with her necklace. "You know," Sarah finally said, "the most interesting thing about the article is the details, information that only a few people knew." Jessica took a sip of water, avoiding her gaze. "I guess someone close to you has betrayed you." "It seems so," confirmed Sarah, leaning slightly forward. "The problem is that only 6 people knew the exact terms mentioned in the article, and only one of them specifically knew about the conversation Michael and I had the night before the wedding, a conversation I told you about the next day, in confidence." The silence that followed was dense, charged. Jessica finally looked up, a mixture of defiance and guilt in her eyes. "Are you accusing me of something, Sarah?" "It's not an accusation if it's a fact," replied Sarah calmly. "The question isn't whether you leaked the information, Jessica. The question is why. How much did they pay you?" Jessica let out a bitter laugh. "Does it matter? You have everything now, the mansion, the prestigious surname, the security you always wanted for Tyler." "I thought you were my friend," said Sarah. the pain filtering into her voice despite her efforts to maintain composure. "I was," exclaimed Jessica, immediately lowering her voice when some people turned toward them. "I was until you became someone I barely recognize, the perfect Mrs. Miller, with her charity galas and her family jewels." "I never changed with you," replied Sarah. "I remained the same person." Jessica shook her head. "You know what's the worst? That you started believing in your own farce. I saw how you looked at Michael at the wedding, how you talked about him afterwards. It was no longer a business agreement for you, was it? You fell in love with him, while still pretending it was all a business strategy." The words hit Sarah with unexpected force, touching a truth that she herself was just beginning to recognize. "And that justifies your betrayal?" she asked quietly. "Victoria Harrison contacted me," Jessica finally admitted. "She knew we were friends. She offered enough money to change my life, Sarah, to give me the security you got by marrying Michael." "Victoria," repeated Sarah, the pieces finally fitting together. "Of course, she never got over the humiliation of seeing me return as Michael's wife." Jessica had the decency to appear ashamed. "I'm sorry, Sarah, I really am. But when I saw the opportunity—" "You took it, regardless of who you hurt in the process," completed Sarah. "Including an 8-year-old boy whose life could be completely altered by your selfishness." The mention of Tyler seemed to affect Jessica more than any other argument. "I never wanted to hurt Tyler," she murmured. "But you did," replied Sarah, picking up her purse and standing up. "You've put at risk the stability for which I accepted this whole arrangement in the first place." Before leaving, she leaned slightly. "One last thing, Jessica. I want you to know that Michael and I anticipated the possibility of leaks. The prenuptial contract includes specific clauses about confidentiality and its legal consequences. I hope what Victoria paid you compensates for the legal costs you'll face." It was a bluff, of course. They hadn't anticipated anything similar, but the expression of panic on Jessica's face confirmed she had hit the mark. As she left the cafe, Sarah felt a strange mixture of pain and determination. Jessica's betrayal hurt deeply, but it had also clarified something important. Despite the artificial origin of her marriage, what she felt for Michael, and what he apparently felt for her, had transformed into something authentic. Now only one question remained: how would they save what they had built together from the consequences of this leak? The news broke like a controlled bomb. Despite Patricia and her public relations team's efforts, the original article was picked up by major media and amplified on social networks. By the time Michael returned from Seattle 2 days later, the Miller marriage had become a national topic of debate. Sarah waited for Michael in the mansion's study, surrounded by newspapers and tablets showing different versions of the same story. She had spent the last 48 hours protecting Tyler from the scandal, making sure he didn't hear comments at school, while coordinating with Patricia on the official response. When Michael entered, his face showed the fatigue of international flights and business crises, but his eyes lit up when he saw her. "Sarah," he said simply, crossing the room in few strides to take her in an unexpectedly intimate embrace. She allowed herself a moment of vulnerability, leaning on his strength before gently pulling away. "We have a lot to discuss." Michael nodded, loosening his tie as he sat across from her. "How's Tyler?" The question, prioritizing the child over the business crisis, moved Sarah. "He's fine. We've maintained normalcy at home, and Emily is watching to make sure there are no comments at school." "Good," said Michael, the relief evident in his voice. "And Richard Thompson?" "That's the complicated part," replied Sarah, passing him a tablet. "He called this morning. He wants a meeting with both of us, tomorrow at his office." Michael reviewed the email with a grave expression. "Do you think he's cancelled the alliance?" "He hasn't done so explicitly, but his tone is not optimistic." They remained silent for a moment, the weight of the situation settling between them. Finally, Sarah spoke about what she had discovered. "It was Jessica who leaked the information. Working for Victoria Harrison." Michael's expression hardened. "Your friend? The one who recommended you for the initial job?" Sarah nodded, the pain of the betrayal still fresh. "I confronted her. She didn't deny it." "We can take legal action," began Michael, but Sarah shook her head. "That would only keep the scandal alive. Besides," she hesitated, looking for the right words. "The truth is, they didn't lie, Michael. Our marriage began exactly as they say, A business agreement, a business strategy. It began that way, said Michael softly, his gaze intensifying. But now, he left the sentence unfinished, the air between them charging with everything unsaid for months. Sarah stood up, unable to maintain stillness. She walked to the window overlooking the garden, where the first stars were beginning to appear in the evening sky. "You know what's most ironic?" she finally said. "Jessica accused me of believing in our own farce, of falling in love with you while still pretending it was all a business agreement." She heard Michael stand up, his steps approaching slowly until they stopped right behind her. "And was she right?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Sarah closed her eyes, the moment of truth finally inevitable. Yes. The simple word hung suspended between them, transforming the air, the space, the reality they had carefully constructed. Michael's hands gently rested on her shoulders, turning her to face him. His eyes, usually controlled, revealed a vulnerability that Sarah had never seen before. "Then we're both believers in our own farce," he said, his voice rough with contained emotion. "Because I've been fighting against what I feel for you for months, Sarah, trying to respect our original agreement, while each day it became harder to remember that this began as a business strategy." Sarah felt her heart racing. "Why didn't you say anything?" "For the same reason you kept silent," he replied. "Fear of complicating things, of pressuring you, of discovering that for you it was still just a contract." His hands rose to cup Sarah's face with a delicacy that contrasted with his usual authority. "But now that everything is exposed," he continued, "now that we have nothing to lose, Sarah Collins, I've fallen in love with you, with your strength, your intelligence, your integrity, with how you care for Tyler, with how you face each challenge without losing your essence." Sarah felt as if the world were spinning around her, Michael's words transforming months of unacknowledged tension into a new reality. "I fell in love with you too," she finally confessed, "although I fought against it, convinced that for you I was still just a piece in your business strategy." A smile illuminated Michael's tired face. "What a pair of fools we've been." And then, after months of controlled proximity, of accidental touches and prolonged gazes, Michael eliminated the distance between them. His lips found Sarah's in a kiss that had nothing to do with the brief ceremonial contact of their wedding. This was a real kiss, deep, charged with all the feelings contained for so long. When they finally separated, both breathing unevenly, Sarah rested her forehead against Michael's. "And now what?" she asked, the reality of their situation slowly returning. "The scandal, Thompson, the company. Now we face all that together," replied Michael with determination. "Not as a business team, but as a real couple, as a family, with Tyler." The mention of the boy made Sarah smile. "He adores you, you know. He asked me last week if he could call you Dad someday." Michael's expression transformed with genuine emotion. "Really? I would love that. When he's ready." They sat together on the study's couch, hands intertwined, designing a strategy to face the consequences of the leak, not as calculating executives, but as a couple defending their relationship, their family, their joint future. "I think we should be honest with Thompson," said Sarah after considering various options. "Not confirm the entire article, but admit that yes, our marriage began with practical considerations on both sides." "And then?" asked Michael, gently caressing her intertwined fingers. "And then we tell him the truth that not even Jessica knew, that we fell in love in the process, that what began as an arrangement transformed into something genuine." Michael considered the proposal. "Richard is a romantic at heart, although he pretends to be a business shark. It might work, especially because it's the truth," added Sarah. "We wouldn't be pretending anything." They remained silent for a moment, assimilating the new reality of their relationship, the immediate complications and future possibilities. "There's something else you should know," said Michael finally, his expression turning serious. "Something I discovered in Seattle that significantly changes our situation." Sarah waited, suddenly alert. "The financial problems of Miller Enterprises are much more serious than I initially told you," he continued. "The empire my father built is on the verge of collapse if we don't get a substantial capital injection in the coming months." "How much more serious?" asked Sarah, her analytical mind immediately activating. "Serious enough that the alliance with Thompson is no longer just desirable, but absolutely necessary for the company's survival." The weight of this revelation settled between them. Sarah processed the information, connecting dots that previously seemed unrelated. "That's why you were so willing to consider a marriage of convenience," she finally said. "It wasn't just a business strategy. It was a desperate measure to save the family business." Michael nodded, vulnerability again visible in his eyes. "I should have told you everything from the beginning, but I was afraid that if you knew the true magnitude of the problems, you would reject the proposal." Sarah squeezed his hand. "Absolute honesty, remember? That was one of my conditions." "I know, and I'm sorry," he replied sincerely. "I won't hide anything from you again, I promise." Sarah reflected on this new information as she observed the face of the man she had unexpectedly fallen in love with, a man who, beneath his facade of control and power, had been desperately fighting to keep the family legacy afloat. "We'll save the company," she said with determination that surprised even herself. "Together, but not through manipulations or appearances, but with real strategies, innovation, and perhaps fresh perspectives that only someone outside your usual circle could bring." Michael's smile expanded slowly, a mixture of admiration and hope illuminating his tired face. "Do you know why I fell in love with you, Sarah Collins?" "Because of my irresistible charm," she joked, trying to lighten the moment. "Because you see solutions where others see only problems," he replied, leaning in to kiss her again. "And because, despite everything you've been through, you've never lost your integrity." That night, for the first time since their wedding, they truly slept together, not in connected rooms, but embraced in the same bed. There was no physical intimacy beyond kisses and caresses. Both knew they had time to explore that facet of their now genuine relationship. What mattered was the barrier that had finally fallen between them, the complete honesty they now shared, and the joint determination to face whatever came. The meeting with Thompson, the media scandal, the business challenges, and the building of a real family from what had begun as an elaborate performance. As Sarah fell asleep in Michael's arms, she thought about how strange the paths of destiny are. A disaster with a glass of wine had led her here, transforming the worst night of her life into the first step toward a future she could never have imagined. The headquarters of Thompson Investments occupied a historic building in downtown Los Angeles. Its dark wood interiors, classic art and antique furniture contrasted with the modern, bright spaces of Miller Enterprises, reflecting the fundamental difference between both companies: tradition versus innovation. Sarah and Michael waited in a meeting room that looked like it came out of a 19th century English club. The silence between them was comfortable, their hands intertwined on the mahogany table, communicating more than words. "Whatever happens," said Michael softly, "let's remember that we've already achieved the most important thing." Sarah gave him a questioning look. "Us," he clarified, gently squeezing her hand. "You, me, and Tyler. A real family." The door opened before Sarah could respond. Richard Thompson entered with a firm step despite his 70 years, followed by his son Alexander, heir to the financial empire and known for his even more conservative approach than his father's. "Michael, Sarah," greeted Richard formally, taking a seat across from them. "I appreciate you coming so quickly." "We appreciate the opportunity to speak in person," replied Michael with a professional tone. Richard placed an iPad showing the infamous article on the table. "I assume you're familiar with this?" "We are," confirmed Sarah, determined to maintain dignity in the conversation. "I'd like to hear your version," said Richard, reclining in his chair, "before making definitive decisions about our alliance." Michael and Sarah exchanged a quick glance, following the plan they had discussed the night before. "Mr. Thompson," began Sarah, slightly surprising the Thompsons, who expected Michael to take the lead. "There are elements of truth in that article, mixed with exaggerations and distortions." Richard arched an eyebrow, visibly interested in this direct approach. "It's true that our marriage began with practical considerations," she continued. "Michael needed to project stability to attract investors like you. I was seeking security for my son after years of struggling alone. A marriage of convenience, then," concluded Alexander with evident disapproval. "At first," intervened Michael. "But what that article doesn't mention, because its sources don't know it, is what happened afterward." Sarah took over, her voice softening. "We fell in love, Mr. Thompson. It wasn't in the plan, it wasn't part of the agreement, but it happened. What began as a practical arrangement transformed into something genuine." Richard studied their faces with the intensity of a man accustomed to detecting falsehoods in million-dollar negotiations. "I believe you," he finally said, surprising his own son. "I've seen too many marriages in our circle, Michael, those that are pure appearance, those that are mere social transactions. You two—" "There's something different." A glimpse of hope appeared on the horizon, but Alexander quickly overshadowed it. "The question, Father," he intervened with a pragmatic tone, "is not whether their love story is touching. The question is whether Miller Enterprises is a safe investment considering these revelations." Michael straightened his shoulders, entering business mode. "The business fundamentals haven't changed, Alexander. Our alliance proposal remains solid." "Does it?" questioned the Thompson heir. "Our analysts have been reviewing your numbers in greater depth since this scandal emerged, and what they find is concerning." Richard slid another iPad toward them, showing a detailed financial analysis of Miller Enterprises. Sarah, with her business administration background, immediately understood the gravity of what she was seeing. Thompson's analysts had discovered the true magnitude of the financial problems. "As you can see," continued Alexander, "your situation is much more precarious than you initially led us to believe. Your company needs much more than a strategic alliance. It needs a complete bailout." Michael maintained his composure, although Sarah could feel the tension in his body. "We're in the midst of a restructuring, with the right investments." "Investments that would have to be significantly larger than we had agreed upon," interrupted Richard, "and with different conditions." The silence that followed was loaded with implications. Sarah understood they had reached the true purpose of the meeting. The Thompsons, taking advantage of the vulnerability created by the scandal, were going to propose new terms. Terms that, she suspected, would be much less favorable. "What conditions do you have in mind?" she asked directly. Richard seemed to appreciate her frankness. "Majority stake in Miller Enterprises. Michael would remain as CEO, but strategic decisions would go through our board." The proposal was exactly what Michael had feared from the beginning, losing control of the family business. Sarah felt how his hand tensed under the table. "That would amount to an acquisition, not an alliance," replied Michael with a controlled voice. "Call it what you prefer," said Alexander with calculated indifference. "It's the only viable option considering the real state of your finances and the reputational damage from the scandal." Sarah observed the dynamic between father and son, noticing how Richard seemed slightly uncomfortable with Alexander's harshness. There was an opening there, a possible division she could exploit. "Mr. Thompson," said Sarah, addressing Richard specifically, "you built your empire from scratch, just like Michael's father. I understand that you see in Miller Enterprises not just an investment, but a family legacy similar to yours. Am I wrong?" Richard looked at her with renewed interest. "You're correct, Sarah." "Then you'll understand why Michael fights so fiercely to maintain the essence of what his father built," she continued. "It's not just pride, it's respect for a legacy." She saw a flash of recognition in the patriarch's eyes and continued, "What we propose is a true alliance. Your experience and capital combined with our capacity for innovation and adaptation. Not an absorption, but a fusion of strengths." Alexander began to object, but Richard raised a hand, silencing him. "Continue, Sarah." Sensing the opening, Sarah improvised a proposal that had been forming in her mind since the night before. Thompson Investments would obtain a significant, but not majority stake. We would create a joint board with equal representation. Additionally, she made a strategic pause. "We would implement a diversification program that I've been developing for the Miller Foundation, but which has promising commercial applications." "What kind of program?" asked Richard, genuinely intrigued. "Microfinance for women entrepreneurs," explained Sarah, "a market practically ignored by traditional financial institutions, but with repayment rates above 97% according to recent studies." She saw how Richard's interest intensified. The program had been her personal project at the foundation, inspired by her own experience as a single mother struggling for opportunities. "The combination of Thompson's financial expertise with our innovation network would create a unique banking product," she continued, "socially responsible but highly profitable, the kind of initiative that would position both families as pioneers in an emerging sector." An evaluative silence followed her proposal. Alexander looked skeptical, but Richard seemed to be seriously considering her words. "It's an interesting proposal," the patriarch finally said. "Alexander, Could you leave us alone for a moment?" The heir seemed about to protest, but his father's look left no room for discussion. When the door closed behind him, Richard visibly relaxed. "Sarah, Michael," he began with a more personal tone, "there's something you need to understand. Alexander represents the new generation of our company, pragmatic, focused exclusively on numbers and returns. While you value tradition, family, long-term relationships," completed Sarah. Richard nodded. "Precisely. I built Thompson Investments with certain principles that I fear are being diluted." He looked directly at Michael. "Your father and I were rivals, but we respected each other. When I learned of your marriage, I was genuinely pleased. I thought that finally our families could unite, not just in business, but in shared values." "And they can," affirmed Sarah. "The fact that our marriage began in an unconventional way doesn't change the values we now share. Family, integrity, long-term vision." Richard studied them a moment longer before making a decision. "I propose the following: 40% stake for Thompson Investments, joint board as you suggest, and development of that microfinance program as a pilot project. If it demonstrates viability in a year, we'll increase our investment without demanding majority control." Michael and Sarah exchanged a quick glance, silently communicating. "We accept," said Michael, extending his hand. As the men sealed the agreement with a handshake, Sarah felt a deep relief. They had saved the company, preserved the Miller legacy, and opened the way for the project that meant so much to her personally. "One last thing," added Richard, as they stood to leave. "That microfinance program, I'd like you to present it at the annual Banking Association Gala next month. It would be a powerful statement, especially coming from you two together." "It will be an honor," replied Sarah. As they left the Thompson building, Michael waited until they were in the privacy of their car to take Sarah in his arms. "You're absolutely brilliant," he said, kissing her with a mixture of admiration and passion. "You not only saved the company, you've directed it toward a better future." Sarah smiled against his lips. "We make a good team, don't you think?" "The best," confirmed Michael, gently caressing her cheek. "You know what's most extraordinary? That even if we lost everything tomorrow, the company, the mansion, the entire Miller empire, I would still consider myself the luckiest man in the world for having you and Tyler." The declaration, so different from the concerns that had dominated their lives for months, made Sarah realize how much they had both changed. What began as a transaction had transformed into something infinitely more valuable, a real family built on mutual respect, admiration, and finally, love. "Let's go home," she said softly. "Tyler will be waiting to hear how everything went." And as the car drove away from the financial district, Sarah reflected on the ironies of destiny, how her greatest humiliation had become the first step toward her greatest happiness, and how the agreement she had accepted out of necessity had finally given her the freedom to be completely herself. The Beverly Wilshire Hotel ballroom gleamed under the dim lights of hundreds of candles. Los Angeles cream of society circulated among elegantly decorated tables, champagne glasses in hand, while the orchestra played discreetly in a corner. It was the annual Banking Association Gala, one of the most prestigious events on the social calendar, and tonight, all eyes were on the couple who had just made their entrance, Sarah and Michael Miller. A month had passed since the meeting with Richard Thompson and the agreement that had saved Miller Enterprises. A month in which the media scandal about their marriage had gradually faded, replaced by new gossip and controversies of the elite. But the curious glances persisted. Whispers followed their steps. Sarah clung discreetly to Michael's arm as they advanced through the ballroom. Her midnight blue dress, designed by one of America's most exclusive fashion designers, reflected her new position with discreet elegance. She was no longer the assistant intimidated by luxury. Now she moved in it with a natural grace that surprised even herself. "You're tense," murmured Michael, leaning slightly toward her. "Everything okay?" Sarah gave him a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I know she's here. I saw her on the guest list." She didn't need to specify who she was referring to. Victoria Harrison, the woman who had orchestrated her public humiliation through Jessica, was surely observing them from some corner of the ballroom. "She can't do anything to us," replied Michael with confidence. "Our position is stronger than ever." Sarah nodded, although the unease persisted. Tonight wasn't just about presenting their microfinance program to the financial elite. It was also their first prominent public appearance since the scandal had broken. Time a trial by fire for their renewed relationship and social position. Richard Thompson approached to greet them, his imposing presence naturally opening a path among the guests. The couple of the moment, he greeted with genuine affection, kissing Sarah's cheek and firmly shaking Michael's hand. Ready to revolutionize the financial system tonight? More than ready, confirmed Sarah, grateful for the public support of such an influential man. As the evening progressed, Sarah was surprised by the ease with which she navigated the complex social waters that had once terrified her. She conversed with bankers about interest rates, with politicians' wives about charitable initiatives, and with businessmen about diversification strategies. This world that had once brutally rejected her now received her, if not with open arms, at least with cautious respect. It was during a conversation with an ambassador's wife when she finally saw her, Victoria Harrison, resplendent in a scarlet-red dress that screamed, "Look at me," observing her from across the ballroom with an indecipherable expression. Sarah felt her body involuntarily tense. A year ago, that woman had humiliated her in front of this same social circle. Months later, she had tried to destroy her marriage by leaking confidential information. And now she was here, staring at her fixedly, as if evaluating her next move. "Excuse me for a moment," said Sarah to her interlocutor, making an impulsive decision that surprised even herself. With determined steps, she crossed the ballroom directly toward Victoria Harrison. She saw the surprise in the woman's eyes when she realized Sarah was deliberately heading toward her. "Victoria," she greeted with a calm she didn't feel. "What a coincidence finding you here." Victoria quickly composed herself, adopting a feline smile. "Sarah Miller, or should I say, the business revelation of the year. Everyone is talking about your innovative program." The venom in her voice was subtle, but unmistakable. "I'm glad to know the program is generating interest," replied Sarah with studied diplomacy. "Especially among people who normally don't pay attention to social initiatives." Victoria's eyes narrowed at the veiled criticism. "I've always been interested in overcoming stories, like yours, from spilling wine on my designer dress to marrying one of the most powerful men in Los Angeles. Impressive trajectory." Sarah maintained her composure, although she felt her pulse quickening. "Life takes many turns, doesn't it? Some people move forward, while others remain stuck in old grudges." Victoria took a small sip of her champagne, studying Sarah over the rim of the glass. "Tell me, how's your friendship with Jessica? So loyal, so close." Until she wasn't. The mention of Jessica was like a dagger, precisely as Victoria had intended. Sarah hadn't spoken to her former friend since the confrontation at the cafe. "Jessica made her choices," she responded with careful neutrality. "As we all do. Some choices have unexpected consequences," continued Victoria, moving slightly closer, "like trusting the wrong person or underestimating an adversary." Sarah then understood that this conversation wasn't casual. Victoria had something else, some other card she hadn't played yet. "What do you really want, Victoria?" she asked directly, tired of the games. Victoria's smile widened. "I want you to know that this isn't over. Your fairy tale, your miraculous rise, everything has an expiration date. Is that a threat?" "It's a promise," replied Victoria, leaning in to whisper, "I have information about the true finances of Miller Enterprises that would make the Securities and Exchange Commission tremble. Your husband isn't as impeccable as he appears." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine, but maintained her imperturbable expression. "If you had something really compromising, you would have already used it." "All in good time," replied Victoria. "Tonight is your moment of glory. Enjoy it while it lasts." With those words, she elegantly walked away, leaving Sarah with an unease she struggled not to show externally. Michael appeared at her side moments later, his face reflecting concern. "I saw you talking with Victoria. What did she want?" Sarah hesitated for an instant. Her instinct was to protect Michael from more worries, but they had promised absolute honesty between them. "Veiled threats," she finally replied. She hinted at having compromising information about the company's finances. She saw how Michael's face slightly paled. "What kind of information?" She wasn't specific, She just said it would make the SEC tremble. Michael ran a hand through his hair, a nervous gesture rare for him. It could be a bluff. Is it? Asked Sarah directly, studying his reaction. Before Michael could respond, Richard Thompson approached them again. It's time for your presentation, he announced, oblivious to the tension of the moment. Everyone is waiting. Sarah and Michael exchanged a meaningful look. The conversation would have to wait. The podium was illuminated by a single spotlight, the rest of the ballroom in respectful dimness, as Sarah formally presented the microfinance program for women entrepreneurs. Her voice, clear and passionate, captured the attention of even the most skeptical traditional bankers. It's not charity, she emphasized, projecting slides with convincing statistics. It's a smart investment in an underserved segment with superior repayment rates and exponential growth potential. Michael joined her for the final section, his presence perfectly complementing hers, as they detailed how the alliance between Miller Enterprises and Thompson Investments would revolutionize the sector. As they spoke, Sarah glimpsed Victoria Harrison among the audience, observing them with a calculating expression that fed her unease. Upon concluding, the applause was enthusiastic. Richard Thompson was the first to stand, initiating an ovation that others quickly followed. For a moment, Sarah allowed herself to savor the triumph, the professional validation she had so longed for. But the feeling of victory was ephemeral. As guests approached to congratulate them, Sarah couldn't stop thinking about Victoria's threat and Michael's reaction. She had seen something in his eyes, a flash of genuine concern that suggested Victoria's words weren't completely unfounded. Hours later, in the privacy of their room in the mansion, they could finally talk. "Is there something I should know, Michael?" asked Sarah directly as she removed the diamond earrings he had given her for the occasion. "About the company's finances. Something you haven't told me." Michael, who had loosened his bow tie and unbuttoned the first buttons of his shirt, paused. The dim light from the lamps created dramatic shadows on his face, accentuating the internal struggle he seemed to be waging. "My father," he finally began, sitting on the edge of the bed. "He wasn't as impeccable as the world believed." Sarah sat beside him, taking his hand in silence, encouraging him to continue. During the 2008 financial crisis, he made questionable decisions. Creative accounting, mainly. Nothing illegal by the standards of the time, but under current regulation, it could be considered fraud, completed Sarah, finally understanding. Michael nodded. "I've been working with trusted auditors to gradually correct those irregularities without raising alarms. It's part of the reason why our financial situation became so precarious. And how could Victoria have access to that information? Her ex-husband worked in the finance department during that time," explained Michael. "He was fired when he tried to blackmail my father. We believed he had no concrete evidence, just suspicions." Sarah processed this information, pieces of the puzzle finally fitting together. That's why her hatred goes beyond an incident with wine on a dress. It's personal, familial. "Exactly," confirmed Michael. "The humiliation you suffered that night was probably planned. Not a coincidence, but a calculated revenge against anyone associated with me." The revelation left Sarah momentarily speechless. All this time she had believed her initial disgrace had been bad luck, an unfortunate accident. Discovering that she had possibly been manipulated from the beginning was disconcerting. "Why didn't you tell me before?" she finally asked. Michael squeezed her hand. "At first because I didn't trust anyone with this information. Later, out of shame. I didn't want you to think that everything my family built was tainted." Sarah reflected on his words, on the additional complications this revelation added to their already complex situation. "What do we do now?" she asked. "If Victoria really has evidence and presents it to the authorities, we could lose everything," completed Michael, the gravity of the situation evident in his voice. "The company, the reputation, possibly even face legal consequences for actions I didn't even commit." Sarah stood up, walking to the window overlooking the nighttime garden. The moon illuminated the shadows of the trees, creating a landscape of light and darkness that perfectly reflected their moral dilemma. "There's another option," she finally said, turning toward Michael. "We could get ahead of it." "What do you mean?" "Total transparency," explained Sarah. "Hire external auditors, reveal the irregularities ourselves, implement a correction plan supervised by regulators." Michael looked at her with incredulity. That would provoke a massive financial scandal. The stock would plummet, investors would flee. Temporarily, acknowledged Sarah. But in the long term, we would rebuild on solid foundations, not on secrets that can collapse at any moment. She approached him again, kneeling to be at eye level. Michael, you're not responsible for your father's decisions, but you are responsible for yours. For our future, for the legacy we'll leave to Tyler. She saw the struggle in his eyes, the fear of losing everything he had worked to maintain, mixed with the recognition of the truth in her words. It would be devastating, he finally said. Years of work to recover. But we would do it together, replied Sarah with conviction. Without secrets, without threats hanging over our heads, truly free for the first time. Michael looked at her for a long time, with a mixture of fear and admiration. Your integrity never ceases to amaze me, he finally said, even when it means facing the abyss. It's not an abyss, she corrected softly. It's simply a new beginning. And we've proven to be quite good at starting over, don't you think? A hint of a smile appeared on Michael's lips. He took Sarah's hands in his, and she felt the decision forming in him before he spoke. Tomorrow I'll call Richard, he said. We'll need his support to survive this. Then independent auditors and a meeting with the SEC. Sarah nodded, aware of the magnitude of what they had just decided. It wouldn't be easy. There would be moments of doubt, of fear, of regret perhaps. But for the first time since this strange odyssey began, she felt they were making a completely independent decision, not imposed by circumstances or external manipulations. I love you, she said simply, the words flowing naturally now, without the weight of the unspoken that had characterized so many of their previous exchanges. And I love you, replied Michael, drawing her to him. More than I ever thought possible. As they melted into an embrace that communicated more than words, Sarah thought about the strange paths that had led her here, from humiliation to opportunity, from pragmatic agreement to genuine love, from carefully maintained appearances to liberating truth. Tomorrow they would face the world with honesty, assuming the consequences of decisions made long before their paths crossed. But tonight, in the intimacy of the room they now fully shared, there was nothing more than the two of them and the certainty that, whatever happened, they would face it together. Exactly 18 months had passed since that fateful night when Sarah spilled wine on Victoria Harrison's dress. 18 months of radical transformation, of falls and rises, of masks abandoned and truths found. The Griffith Observatory, the same setting for so many Los Angeles social events, gleamed under golden lights and floral decorations in pastel tones. But tonight was different. Tonight, the event was organized by the Miller Collins Foundation, recently renamed to reflect the true partnership that directed it. Sarah observed from a discreet corner as guests arrived. She wasn't the same woman who had timidly entered that world a year and a half ago. Her elegance was no longer borrowed but natural. Her confidence wasn't feigned but earned through trials and tribulations. Everything is perfect, commented Emily Miller, approaching with 2 glasses of champagne. She offered one to Sarah as they contemplated together the result of months of planning. The microcredit program is really changing lives. Sarah smiled, accepting the glass. 200 women entrepreneurs funded in the first year. Small businesses that are transforming entire communities. And all thanks to your vision, added Emily with sincere admiration. The past 12 months had been as challenging as Sarah had anticipated. The decision to voluntarily reveal past accounting irregularities had triggered an earthquake in the American business world. Miller Enterprises stock had initially plummeted. The media had a field day, and for weeks it seemed the entire empire might collapse. But something unexpected had also occurred. The voluntary transparency, the assumption of responsibility, and the detailed correction plan had generated a wave of respect among key partners and investors. Richard Thompson, true to his word, had maintained his support, publicly declaring his confidence in the new era of integrity at Miller Enterprises. And the microfinance program, far from being collateral damage of the crisis, had flourished, becoming the standard bearer of the renewed company and a model that other financial institutions were beginning to imitate. "There's your husband," pointed Emily, interrupting her reflections. Sarah followed her gaze to the entrance where Michael had just arrived with Tyler at his side. The boy, now almost 10, looked adorably formal in his small suit. visibly proud to accompany the man who, for a few months now, he officially called Dad. The legal adoption had been finalized just a few weeks ago, culminating a process that had begun in their hearts much earlier. Seeing them together, so evidently united by a bond that transcended blood, filled Sarah with a happiness she had never believed possible. Michael located Sarah among the crowd, and his face lit up with that smile that still accelerated her heart after so many months together. He excused himself to the guests he was conversing with and headed toward her, with Tyler following closely. "Sorry for the delay," he said upon reaching her. "Someone insisted on stopping by the comic book store before coming." Tyler smiled with a mischievous expression. "They had the limited edition, Dad." It was an emergency. The term Dad, now used so naturally, still provoked an evident emotion in Michael every time he heard it. "A superhero emergency, clearly a priority," joked Sarah, leaning in to fix her son's slightly crooked tie. "You look beautiful," commented Michael, gently kissing her cheek. "The perfect hostess." "Co-host," she corrected. "Tonight is as much yours as mine." And it was. The charity gala, aimed at raising funds to expand the microcredit program, represented the culmination of their shared vision, using the privilege and resources at their disposal to create opportunities for those who struggled as Sarah had struggled. Tyler excused himself to go greet some school friends, whose parents were also attending the event, leaving them momentarily alone. "Have you seen the attendee list?" asked Michael in a low voice. Sarah nodded. "She's here. I saw her arrive a few minutes ago." They didn't need to specify names. Victoria Harrison had been deliberately invited, a decision some would consider surprising given her history of antagonism. But for Sarah, it was a necessary step to completely close the circle. "Are you sure about this?" asked Michael, concern evident in his voice. "Completely," confirmed Sarah. "It's time to leave the past behind. Definitively." The evening proceeded like a dream. The charity auction exceeded all expectations. The presentations by women entrepreneurs who had prospered, thanks to the program, moved even the most skeptical, and the announcement of the international expansion of the initiative was received with genuine enthusiasm. Near the end of the night, when guests began to disperse, Sarah finally found herself face-to-face with Victoria Harrison. The woman had remained on the peripheries throughout the event, observing with an indecipherable expression. "Victoria," greeted Sarah with professional courtesy. "Thank you for coming tonight." Victoria seemed momentarily disconcerted by the genuine kindness. "A surprising invitation considering our history." "Precisely why I invited you," replied Sarah. "I believe it's time to close that chapter." An uncomfortable silence settled between them, loaded with the weight of past humiliations, betrayals, and threats. "Your great voluntary revelation robbed us of our opportunity to expose you," Victoria finally said, a flash of the old bitterness briefly appearing. "It was clever. It wasn't strategy," corrected Sarah softly. "It was integrity. The same that my mother demonstrated years ago when she reported irregularities in this same company." Victoria studied her intensely. "You've really changed. You're no longer the frightened woman who spilled wine on my dress." "Nor are you the only one defined by that incident," replied Sarah. "We're all more complex than our worst or best moments." She extended an envelope toward Victoria, who took it with evident confusion. "What is this?" "An invitation to join the advisory board of our microfinance program," explained Sarah. "Your experience in the financial sector would be invaluable, and your perspective different from ours." The surprise on Victoria's face was genuine. "Why would you do this, after everything I tried to do to you?" Sarah smiled slightly. "Because sometimes the best way to disable an enemy is to turn them into an ally. And because I believe that, under all those layers of resentment, there's a brilliant woman whose talent is being wasted on personal vendettas." She let her words sink in before adding, "Think about it. I don't need an immediate answer." As she walked away, she felt a strange sense of closure, as if the last loose thread of her complicated story had finally been tied. Michael was waiting for her with Tyler near the exit, both observing her with almost identical expressions of curiosity and admiration. "How did it go?" asked Michael when she reached his side. "Liberating," she replied simply, intertwining her arm with his as the three left the observatory together. The night was perfect. the spring air laden with floral fragrances as they walked along the illuminated paths of Griffith Park. Tyler ran a few meters ahead, chasing fireflies with the inexhaustible energy of childhood. "You know," commented Michael, observing the boy with evident paternal love, "when I planned that marriage of convenience, I never imagined it would end up being the best decision of my life for completely different reasons than I anticipated." Sarah smiled, resting her head on her husband's shoulder. "Life rarely follows our plans, does it? Sometimes it's much better." "Do you regret anything?" asked Michael, his voice revealing a vulnerability he only showed with her. "About how it all began?" Sarah considered the question seriously before responding. "No. Each step, even the painful ones, brought us here. And here is exactly where I want to be." Tyler came running back to them, holding something in his hands. "Look." "I caught one." He carefully opened his palms to reveal a firefly that blinked with its own light in the darkness. "It's beautiful," commented Sarah, kneeling beside her son to better observe the small, luminous insect. "But remember that the most beautiful things must be free to shine in their own way." Tyler nodded with childlike wisdom and completely opened his hands. The firefly slowly rose, its intermittent light moving away toward the night sky. The three watched it disappear, a small point of light among the stars, before continuing their way. "Mum," asked Tyler, taking Sarah's hand. "Yes, honey? Are we happy ever after now?" The question, formulated with the direct simplicity of childhood, made Sarah and Michael exchange a knowing look. "Happiness isn't a destination, Tyler," replied Sarah softly. "It's a path we travel every day, with its ups and downs. But yes, right now in this moment, we are very, very happy. And the important thing," added Michael, placing his arm around Sarah's shoulders, "is that we're together to travel that path, whatever it may be." As they advanced under the stars, Sarah reflected on the extraordinary journey her life had been in the last 18 months. From humiliation to triumph, from loneliness to family, from insecurity to confidence. The path hadn't been easy or direct. It had been full of obstacles, betrayals, painful revelations, but each challenge had forged something precious, an authentic love, born from the ashes of a pragmatic agreement, a family built on foundations of hard-won honesty, a legacy of integrity that would transcend their own story. And as she contemplated her husband and son walking by her side under the silver moonlight, Sarah knew with absolute certainty that she wouldn't change anything about her extraordinary journey, because each step, even the most painful ones, had led her exactly where she needed to be.